I want to start off with a two-pronged note. One is for people getting this on tape, other times and other places, and for people who've already been through some of this. Two things around one little center. First, let me point out, those of you who have heard it and those of you who have not heard it, of my continual warning, comment, the things that I may use as an example in life, that I pull out something having to do with religion, philosophy, some form of the arts, sciences, the Pope, rabbis, ministers, for me to continually say that when this is operating at the level in which life means it to operate, the level in which I am operating, that what can verbally sound like some form of criticism is not. And those of you who have been around for a while have heard me say that many, many times. Those of you who haven't heard it, now you've heard me say it, and you'll hear it again, I guess. But for those of you who have heard it, notice this. Everyone is wired up in such a way that even after they hear such a warning, all they've got to do is fall back to the ordinary level of consciousness, to lapse back to their own level of consciousness, the way in which they are wired up, and such warnings become almost meaningless. It would be as though I was going to tell you that I had something of a great superconscious, mystical significance to speak on, and it had to do with colors, let us say. And I said that this is so unusual, it is so unknown ordinarily, that we don't have a name for the color. I can see it, I know what it represents. Purple is the closest that humanity, at our ordinary wavelength, that's the closest we come to, but I'm telling you, purple doesn't get it. Purple is just a feeble attempt. Purple's all right, we need purple in everyday life. It serves a very good purpose. And so I would tell you, for instance, that I'm not going to make up any particular name for this unknown color, but the jumping off place, verbally at least, is for me to tell you that purple is the ordinary attempt to represent this color, that purple is the closest within the visible spectrum that ordinary consciousness can see of this other dimensional color. But if I did that, and I even went to greater extremes to try and sort of warn you, surely you hear what I'm saying, that unless you made some extraordinary effort, and from then on, every time I would mention something about, well, all right, I'm going to tell you this, but first let me point out to you, the color purple tries to do this. People who wear purple try and do this. People who say that purple is meaningful, they believe they're involved with this. And the warning would be gone, because every time you would hear purple, you would be the great Russians' dog slobbering. You might as well be ringing a bell, because you would hear purple, and any sort of warnings would just be out the window. No one is wired up to take a kind of right angle warning, to take right angle directions. No one is wired up to do it. To give any sort of directions, you have to say, all right, I'm going to tell you about a place that nobody's ever been to. And let us say that I have an audience that goes, yes, prepared, ready to hear it, anxious. And I say, well, all right, first, does everybody know where Davenport, Iowa is? Well, all right, Oklahoma City. All right, Dallas. And we get everybody says, all right, Dallas. I say, fine, all right. Well, I'm not talking about Dallas or any of those other places, but let's start Dallas. Now let's imagine if we're going to leave Dallas and head due west for a little bit. Dallas would be like ringing the bell to Pavlov's dogs. If everyone said they knew where Dallas was, there would be a whole series of interconnections that your own voices would bring up about Dallas. A TV show, you being there one time, your first wife or husband having left you in Dallas, having run off with somebody from Dallas, and yet it would be impossible in any meaningful way to start off and say we're going to talk about the land of Oz, the real land of Oz, but you cannot get there from anywhere you ever heard of, which may or may not be true, but if you start on that basis, then there's nothing else to be said. Well, there is something else to be said if you're a run-of-the-mill mystic leader and mystic follower. You say, it can't be done, and thank God we got a book. Thank God we've got some ritual to go through because it cannot be described. There is even no description for me to describe what I'm doing right now. I could say that there is a difference. I'll give you an example of things I could try. And I could insist that I mean what I mean, and for a few seconds, a few of you might go, yeah, I got you. But then it'd be gone. I could say, all right, there are two ways. There's a criticism that goes on at the ordinary level of consciousness. That somebody starts talking about some spiritual, philosophical, anything, apparently dealing with some sort of secret activity, some secret journey that some people attempt to make. Then they immediately fall into criticism. That happens all the way from churches, run-of-the-mill religions, to run-of-the-mill would-be mystics. But I could say, all right, there is a difference now between ordinary criticism, which has nothing to do with this, and, just for the time being, I'll call it objective comparison. And I could insist that you people have got to understand the difference. If I'm talking along and I say, all right, religion ordinarily attempts to point people in this direction, and then I go on to point out to you, or to hint to you, that this is insufficient, this is lacking some dimension to be worthwhile for somebody attempting this. And I could say, all right, that is objective comparison and not a criticism. Because what religion ordinarily do is fine, is necessary for ordinary people and for ordinary life. But notwithstanding perhaps a few seconds of people heard that, a few seconds after that it's all gone, and it sounds like criticism. It all does. Even me spending this time making this distinction again for people with a limited amount of exposure to this and with a minimal amount of interest in it will continue. To hear me stand up here and do this jazz performance and to talk about whatever seems to be appropriate and to continually throw in what seems to be examples, for me to call upon the Pope as an archetype, rabbis, ministers, almost anything, but to periodically say this is no criticism. There is no criticism due life. That no matter that which may seem to be disruptive in life, that which may seem to be unprofitable for the time being, which many things seem to be, I've got to point out to you that people must die, they must rot, they must feed the planet, there must be decomposition for anything to grow, but at any given time there seems to be that which is not immediately profitable, but it is necessary. Only ordinary people criticize manure, criticize madmen, criticize murder, because it is necessary over the long run. There is no way that the ordinary wiring system and someone's so-called consciousness can keep track of the fact that comparisons can be made verbally and there is no critique involved. The system is not wired up to remember that. If it was possible, I would never mention anything in life. All of this would be a jazz performance going at right angles, to use music as an example, would be going at right angles to Ornette Coleman. But it would make hardly any sense. Of course, we got real good, I could complete the circle and we could go back to talking about almost anything. That there would be no quantitative difference whether we were talking about apparently mystical, religious, philosophical matters, or talking about what has happened to avant-garde jazz. Is James Brown really making a comeback? Why don't they leave Ernest Hemingway's papers alone? And have you seen the price of a new Corvette? There is something also of value for you to try and make something out of me spending this time telling you that there is a difference between criticism at the ordinary level and this thing I made up just for the sake of my example, objective comparison. It is not just me talking that bears any significance to what I'm pointing out. You can use it in your own life to find out that the ordinary level, your own partnership, only deals in criticism. Anything beyond that, you begin to get close. You get close to the city limits, at least, of what I have intended by such terms as neuralizing. Line level consciousness can only deal in criticism. It can, unless it was dealing in mathematics. That'd be the closest line level would come, the ordinary consciousness. Everything else is criticism. It is necessary. It is necessary that apparently criticism be needed. It is necessary that apparently you are driven to criticize, and everyone else is driven to criticize. But as far as making this thing that doesn't exist, I made up, quote, objective comparisons, ordinary consciousness cannot do it. It cannot. All you got to do is look inside you. It's not a theory. It's not something I made up. You can, if there was such a thing as objective comparison, and surely all of you can come up with your own definition of what that would be, that you could compare what you think with what somebody else thinks and not have any feeling of criticism toward that which conflicts with what you believe, or if it had to do with feelings or behavior. And it's not possible. That is not what ordinary consciousness is structured to be. It cannot be, and it does not serve its purpose were it capable of doing so. The closest it comes to that, as I have attempted to point out to you, is when it's confronted with that which it finds to be irrelevant. That which your sense of consciousness sees no need to criticize. And if it's pointed out that some people are highly critical of this, it's just beyond you. I don't see why. It's meaningless. Who would bother to criticize that? Who cares? It's meaningless. You're getting close to the third possibility, the third persuasion. Speaking of neuralizing, in line with what I was talking about for the last several weeks of lateral mindedness, can any of you get a glimpse by now that in a quite real sense, neuralizing is a direct attempt to interfere with lateral mindedness? Taken at the most specific level, we would use neuralizing as an operation in the yellow circuit, what seems to be the thinking processes of your own consciousness. You could begin to see neuralizing as a kind of yellow circuit contact sport. Whereas under ordinary conditions, no matter what you would normally think, once you've heard my term, the ordinary processes up here are a contact sport only at the bare minimal level, just enough that there is friction that keeps this thing going, that keeps your own molecules running through your blood system and into the brain. What little amount may reach a person's here or there. Was that a criticism? Trying to see if you were listening. It would seem simple enough to observe, to take my description of man being operated primarily through three circuits, the red, the blue, and the yellow. It would seem simple enough to see the red circuit as being an example of a contact sport, all the way from people being out playing basketball and softball and soccer, two people getting in fistfights. And apparently you could see the blue circuit as being continually involved with a contact sport. What else could you describe as being the heart of so-called human emotions, were it not for a bruised spot? What's all the poetry, the literature, the ordinary conversations of feelings? Instead of someone who has been playing soccer saying, Jesus, you should see the bruise I got on my little calf. When you, in the red circuit, you go into the blue circuit, and what are people doing? They say, oh, you should see the scars I've got, the number of men that's mistreated me, the number of times my parents disappointed me and left me bruised. Or that great philosophical blues song, religious song I pointed out to you some time back, love ain't nothing but the first stage of the blues. Anyone who seems to be subject to the routine operations of human emotions should quite willingly be able to see and admit that, yes, when you're dealing with human emotions, you are confronted with an absolute contact sport. But when you get into the yellow circuit, it does not seem as obvious. To some people, they would be hard-pressed to even see it at all. The most potentially salient examples would be conflicts of ideas, economic ideas, political ideas. But if you will note, or let me put it as a suggestion to you, would you try and note that even in the areas that might first seem to be the prime possible examples of yellow circuit contact sports would be conflicts in ideas, that the very things that you would come up with, I gave you several examples, the very things you would come up with would be fueled by some kind of passion, or else there would be no contact. So what could actually be yellow circuit contact sports? Is it possible to conjure up an example of pristine yellow circuit contact sports? Rather than engage even with myself any further on possible extreme examples, let me suggest to you that ordinarily there are no such examples. That even that would appear to be conflicts of ideas are based on what? Conflicts of feelings. And if it goes any further, it becomes conflicts of knuckles. I just suddenly had a flash I could picture like a cartoon in the New Yorker at a nice trendy New York appearing bar, two guys in suits, perhaps little goatees and glasses, and one's looking at the other with a somewhat menacing manner and saying, I not only take umbrage at your latest theory in higher mathematics, but at your nose also. So if you try to push the extreme, which if you're going to try to let slide, but if you tried to push your own projection of this into potentially combatants that seem to be the archetypical intellectuals, and say that would be, if they both had a theory about some scientific area, and their theories were in conflict, that would be the yellow circuit as a contact sport. That is the best, I suggest to you, that ordinary consciousness could come up with. And to that I would say, again, look, if it stayed, if it was possible, that that would be a true, or close to a true, yellow circuit combatant situation. If there was not any more left than absolute yellow circuit interest in each party's theory, if it was a contact sport, it would be the most boring contact sport in the world. It would be extremely short-lived. It would be almost impossible to observe it, because if it was left simply at that level, and let's say it was a theory on the second second after the Big Bang, and one man gives his theory, and the second man says, my theory is just the opposite from yours. See, that was it. You missed it. That was it. But if it's going to have the ability to be observed, it's going to have to be that the man says, all right, here is my theory. I am Professor X, and here's Professor X theory. And he reads it, or he gives it. And Professor X says, it's your turn, and Professor Y says, I understand your theory, and that same area of mine is just the opposite. That's Professor Y's theory, that is mine, and I'm proud of it. It's just the opposite of yours. Yours is wrong, mine's right. If it had the potential to actually become a contact sport, Professor X would go, watch it. Now, I've worked a long time on this theory. I can prove my theory. In fact, I've got more credentials than you. You graduated, I know, from a damn correspondence school. And Professor Y says, wait a minute. Your wife used to hang around bars. As soon as there was apparent passion, enough that you would notice it, that, hey, this is getting interesting. I went through all this just to show you that any question then of this actually being a true combatant situation with two yellow circuits engaged and nothing else, such a notion is gone. You must see that. So now back to my question to you is what might be possible for the yellow circuit to be an example of life being a contact sport, which it is. But to see the higher areas of the nervous system engaged in the contact sport is a fruitless endeavor. Line level consciousness cannot see above itself. Nothing can, as we have been through many times. The yellow circuit being a contact sport, the first place to find the possibility is not between you and somebody else. It's between you and that internal partnership. It's between you and what seems to be you. It's between you as you can hold some sense of you apart from this ordinary static state, the simplistic background state of so-called consciousness. That is, that you can go at a right angle to what seems to be your own yellow circuit. Now, if this does not strike any familiar ring to neuralizing, then you've been listening with two ears anyway. What would be, since this interests many people for a long time, evidently, what would be the closest thing for the few people involved with this? What would be near sin? Near sin, if all of you would like to write this down for Sunday school and Bible study and Koran study and compare notes to other rabbis and ministers, near sin for the few would be inappropriate repetition. And what I'm describing that would be the possibility of the yellow circuit actually becoming an example of a contact sport is right now forget you and somebody else, because you may never meet anybody with which you could get into a profitable combatant situation vis-a-vis the yellow circuit. Me, for one, but you notice, what's the most I'll talk to you about? Where is the latest jazz festival this summer? Did you, in fact, buy a new Corvette? And have you heard James Brown's new comeback record? Even though this is 1986, I guess that'll hold true for another few decades because James seems to make a small comeback every 5 or 6 years, so at least my specific examples probably will not date this severely. Internally, though, what you're confronted with is when you take what seems to be your own consciousness, not to play with words, what seems to be your own thought processes, what seems to be your own random runnings of imagination, what seems to be your own daydreams, what seems to be your own sitting down serious ponderings, is all what? Repetition. That does not constitute yellow circuit contact sport. As I said, don't worry about trying to find somebody else to engage in yellow circuit contact sport if it was possible. It'd have to be somebody else very similar to you in your need, your interest, and your understanding. And they could not be ordinary. If they're ordinary, you and them would get in a fight. If it's an ordinary, all you're going to do is criticize them. All you're going to do is leave thinking, what an idiot, which is real original. I mean, that, I'd be very proud of you thinking now the other, this other guy, because no telling what he's thinking. Probably something real simple like, what a fool. It's not the first time I have mentioned repetition, of course, in the sense of pointing out that a person should never think the same thing twice. But you should be aware by now, with no great effort, that repetition at the so-called three-dimensional level in which we live, repetition is the name of the efficient game. How could you operate, speaking about you, humanity in general, how could they operate were it not for repetition? If it was required that you go through some kind of active yellow circuit activity to get up every morning and have to think about, all right, that noise coming from that box, so, oh, that's a clock radio, all right. That means I should get up out of bed. Yes, I'm awake now. Yes, that's what that, I set that. I did that myself. All right, now I'm tired of hearing it. There's a knob somewhere I can turn this off. I'll take my hand and I'll turn it off, and then, well, I'll get out of bed. I remember, now I know I have to get out of bed because I go to work. That's it. I'm not dressed for work. I know what I'll do. I'll change clothes. I put on the kind of clothes that people wear at the place where I work. And this is not what they wear. All right. You understand you can't do that. You can't go out and get in your car and worry about, all right, let's see. With a straight drive, this is what's known as straight drive. First, I mash in the clutch or I take it out of gear before I start the car. And then you got to worry about all the way downtown. All right, now, let's see, when it gets the kind of feel, well, I don't know what that means. When the tachometer gets here, I'll take it from, let's see, this is second. I'll put it into third, and I'll push in the clutch. You can't do that. It is easy to criticize, to attack, which all forms, speaking figuratively, all forms and types of would-be mystical systems throughout the history of man has pointed out that being a creature of habit is no good. That Buddha wasn't a creature of habit, Moses wasn't a creature of habit, boy, I'm sure Confucius wasn't. I mean, these are all wired up, weird people. They weren't your old humdrum, same old potatoes out of the same old sack type of guys. Nay. Boy, I wish I could have met those guys. History is full of would-be criticisms of habit. That you cannot be a mystic, you cannot join forces with cosmic powers if you're simply a creature of habit. And all that's based upon some reality, of course. But you have got to see that the efficiency of life, as you can see it now, at line level consciousness, is repetition, habit. And it's not that far removed from your own organism. It's not just the body of humanity It's operating efficiently by operating out of habit and repetition, such as my example of getting up and turning off the clock radio and driving your car and etc. It's you too. What if you had to keep track of, all right, let's see, what's my liver doing? Did my liver just miss a beat? What's my heart, how much blood going? Let's see, I was moving around before I got here. Do I have the right, how much blood's getting to my brain now? About 8%? That's not, I need about 12 or 15 just to get going. And my kidneys, what's going where? You can't do that. Or let's see, I just breathed in. Now, all right, yeah, now it's out. Out, in, out. You can't do that. You'd kill your, well, I don't know where you'd kill yourself, but nobody would associate with you. You wouldn't have to worry about turning off the clock radio or driving to work. You'd be laying there in bed the rest of your life just trying to stay alive. So I used the term when I said near sin for the few, not for everybody else. Remember, this is not criticism. Nothing's wrong. This is, what was that strange creature I made up? Objective comparison. That near sin would be inappropriate repetition. Even I have used some tasks in the past and had you people pursuing a little short-term endeavor that at first glance you could have assumed was to show you that you were a creature of habit, which is child's play. To say that someone is a creature of habit is to say that they are alive. To say that they are a creature of habit is to say that they are ordinary. To say that they are a creature of habit is to say, hey, you're God's little man or woman. You're doing just as you should do. It is a matter of inappropriate repetition. You've got to start moving up, speaking relatively, into different time zones if you want to speak horizontally, but you have got to start moving up the nervous system of man and life to begin to reach areas wherein near sin, that is, inappropriate repetition, becomes of some consequence. When you're down in the lower circuits, when you're into the hoary past of man, where you're into past time zones, when you're into the prime example I just gave, the simple inner workings of your own organism, that which gets you through the day. You get there and you're talking about appropriate repetition. There is no better way to breathe than to go, that is it. If you need a hobby, you can go practice, I guess. If you're that plagued by impending ennui, I guess you can find a book that says how to breathe correctly, according to me. That is the author. If you need a hobby like that, go ahead. But the way to breathe is you let everything alone, and you say, all right, take it. You know? Like JB saying, let's give the horn some, and turn to Fred Wesley and say, Fred, take it. You say to the lungs and the respiratory system, you got it. Give the drummer some, and the system goes. And it should do that all the time. Your respiratory system should not be engaged in a continuing jazz concert. I suggest to you that could prove to be very inappropriate. Your heart should not be fooling around with polyrhythms. From Africa, the Middle East, your heart should be going. When you start moving up the nervous system, when you get into, of course, might get old two-dimensional drawing, and even three-dimensionally is still, remember, lacking. But if we imagine we are moving up, and you get into what appears to be the blue circuits, the unique passions of man, what are you dealing with? Now, there would be many people in the body of life that are wired up to defend vociferously, if not viciously, the idea that indeed the unique character of man is exemplified by his passions. And of course, that are the kinds of people that you normally find being involved with, being supporters of, or the same thing, being critics of the arts. Those things that seem uniquely human, things that other creatures cannot do. But a few people can see that if we're going to talk about repetition, why leave it at my liver? Why not be brave? Why not chin up, old stick? Why not move up? Why not face the facts that given my life up until now, left to my own devices, what is it uniquely human, creative, unusual, surprising, interesting in my so-called emotional life? Whether I strum a guitar or whether I just have a whole bunch of feelings. Whether I'm a feeling kind of guy. Well, you go home and strum your guitar, and what do you strum? You strum the same damn thing you were strumming when you were 15. I mean, if you just go home, you sit there, or you think, I'll write a new song. And so you take an old song you've written, or one you already know, and it comes to where the chord goes to a fourth, and you, I'll go to a fifth here, and then when it went to a fifth, I'll go to a fourth. I never have liked it when women get too pushy and want to tie me down. I'm not the kind of guy to be tied down. Tell me something new. You're telling a woman that when you're 40 years old? You didn't tell a woman that when you were 12? When you were 20? You didn't think it when you were 12? You didn't find yourself repeating what you saw in a movie of a guy back then, a Bogart, or someone who told a woman, who told a dame back in the 40s in black and white, hey, I ain't the kind of guy to be tied down. And you sit there in your little knickers in the dark recesses of that movie theater, and your little wiring system went, yeah, yeah. And he picked up a grapefruit and looked at her face and he went, yeah, yeah. So here it is, 20 years later, and apparently this unique quality of man, mankind, is you repeating something that for the sake of attempting to expand your own resources is inefficient and inappropriate. But notice we're back to this strange juncture. This is not true for everyone else. And of course, ordinary, or rather ordinary people that life uses to talk about these strange matters of religion and would-be mysticism, life at that level almost wants to beg the issue by having these people say, the gods, if they're speaking in religious terms, the gods want us all to be perfect, or whatever their term is. In Christianity, God wants us all to follow Jesus' example. God wants us all to be a living, walking compendium of all that is known and good about being Jewish. How can you argue with that? There is nothing in life of any consequence that is wired up to argue with that. We're not talking about just here and there of some, it amounts to almost a mutant cell that'll pop up and make some smart comment, but you do know there is no organized, large area of thought and feeling in life's body that is coming out through some group of people that stands up, even if they're of a different religion, and says, no, the gods do not want us all to be good. So life talks to itself through man, and it sounds as though this is correct, that the gods want us all to be, and then you fill in the blank, whatever the speaker is, whatever the audience is, whatever they're attempting to do. We should all be good Hindus. We should all be good mystics, blah, 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 whatever their name is. But here's that strange juncture again. Life says that, and I'm not here to tell you because all I know is what life has told me. It is not that that's wrong, but you have simply got to see that that is not the way that the few slip through. That is not the way that the few get fed. If it was, you would not be here. You'd be fat, roly-poly. You'd be happy wherever you found some form of nourishment. So wherever you found, if it was in your forefathers' religion or some other religion or some system, some book you read that said, all right, the gods want us to be like this, not just you. I mean, if you come and join us, that'll be one step in the right direction, but then we got to get everybody this way. If that gave the proper nourishment for the few people, I wouldn't be here, you wouldn't be here. It's not that that story is wrong, but you must see that it does not hold any particular nourishment for an individual. It did not offer any nourishment for you. And in passing, and with the en passant should be a reminder of the warning again, this is not criticism, it's a fact. It's not only does that kind of blanket message from life that we should all be good, we should all be perfect, we should all be Jewish, we should all be Christian, we should all be followers of Commander X. Not only does it not offer nourishment for the few, it also doesn't happen. But remember, that's not criticism. It's not supposed to. But simply notice. Within you, at ordinary level, it sounds like criticism to say, all right, the story has always been out for life, coming out through humanity, using different religions, different terms. It's always the message that the gods want us to all be one way. That is, more like them. And then we point out, all right, that message has always been here, but humanity is no closer. And your system goes, right on. Your system knows criticism when you hear it. How sharp of, oh, how brilliant of me. I mean, as sharp as I am, to be able to point that out, huh? Boy, you're not fooling around with somebody who just fell off of a damn turnip truck. Well-read, been around, sophisticated, hostile enough to be able to point out, hey, the world's not any better off, the people are not, than they were 6,000 years ago. They can't pull anything over on me, right? Remember, that was an aside. It's not even really the point, because it's not true. Near sin, the only thing that anybody should fear is inappropriate repetition. And the two things, the two near sins, is inappropriate repetition and cardinal fact. No, the three things, the other one would be is retreat. Which is a form of inappropriate repetition. I might as well get into this. The few people, this even gets more to a near sin, just to give you a hint. Maybe it does. I shouldn't make statements like that, or you'll begin to think this is a religion, that I know what I'm doing. I mean, that I am speaking directly for the gods or something. Retreat. Because once you understand anything, it should be an absolute rule. Of course, it works its own self out, and you'll understand this on your own without my words, but I'll go ahead and point it out, since we're talking about the wonderful world of near sin. Sins. Maybe I should have been a minister. Sin. I guess I should practice a snarl better. Like sin, like you wipe your tongue off. Everything I always heard talked about is sin. Every time I tried it, it wasn't all that bad. But sin. But getting close to hurting yourself would be to retreat, because once anybody involved with this understands something on their own, which is the beginning of understanding everything, of course, is you should never, ever retreat, even when apparently life does. And you're confronted with this. It's never been put in these kinds of words, but throughout history, there have been people who believed that they were involved with some kind of supernatural, some kind of extraordinary effort. But they found themselves, and they expressed it, sometimes eloquently, supposedly, their disappointment that life seems to let them down. I've made all this effort, and in fact, once or twice I seemed to be in touch with higher forces, and I was all prepared to do good and go forth and give away all my worldly belongings, go out on the highways of life, and to spread the good word. And I thought everything was going so well. I don't mean this just personally, but then I look around, and then they name horrible events that happen, whether it be natural catastrophes, whether it be the appearance of madmen, whether it seems like the crime rate's up. It's people who believe I'm involved, or I'm trying to be. I almost am involved with some sort of great effort for the benefit of everybody. Nothing selfish on my part. I'm trying to help spread the good word, the good forces. And I'll be damned, I no sooner got going good, gave away everything, got me some walking shoes, had the holy book and papers in my hand, and a damn famine came through and wiped out half the population. I got ready to do this, and suddenly, most of the community where I live all got carried away and got converted to some other brand new religion, and nobody listened to me. The term was never put this way, but what it appears, and there is validity to this, although this is a 2/3-dimensional description, that apparently life does retreat. But I have attempted to point you in this direction before, that life does not go in a straight line. All sorts of descriptions. Nothing lives forever. Life will try anything once, which is one of the better scientific descriptions. But ordinary consciousness wants something much more vague, obtuse, contradictory, otherworldly. But the fact is, life will try anything once. You got to face it. And some of the things it tried once and didn't try it again. But when you're looking with ordinary consciousness, which is this 2D consciousness on a 3D background, what it seems to see in life is that life is retreating. And you may have been wired up to see a certain thing that life seemed to be trying, and then it stopped. And it seems to be heartbreaking to many people. As I said, this is a new description, and some of you may have to let it ferment for a while based on your own experience and observations to see what I'm pointing at. But people feel as though life is retreated. Life was doing so well. Things are moving right along, and then something happened. It's like life chickened out. Life blinked and took a step backwards, and I was all set to join in. You can't ever retreat with something you understand. You can't retreat even if apparently life, and you being in the midst of it, that life itself is apparently retreating in that area, because you can't do it. Or I suggest to you that all my jokes about sin and near sin may not be so funny. Don't take that seriously. I shouldn't do that to children and gullible souls. I'll put it this way, you'll regret it. You'll be sorry. How about that? That sounds a little more sophisticated, doesn't it? Doesn't sound like a run-of-the-mill minister or rabbi. It sounds more like your mother. You'll be sorry. You do that far enough, and you'll probably put out your eye. Could even break your back. By such things as trying to find how the yellow circuit can be personally involved in contact sports is to reach a point, I suggest to you, wherein you feel as though you're an ally to life. But notice here how the great world of reason and lateral-mindedness breaks down. Because apparently everyone else would be an ally with life, because everyone else seems to be in conflict with life. That is, everyone else. That is, you and everyone else at ordinary level of consciousness. Everyone is life's critic. Everyone is working on a newspaper. Nobody realizes it. They think Even when I point out, they may say, yeah, but they think they're the only one. Or there might be somebody in every city, but there's somebody within every organism. It's like running a daily paper, and they've been drafted to be the critic. And it's not limited to architecture or music or literature. It's everything. So, of me pointing out that life is a contact sport and must be a contact sport, you can't avoid it, then lateral mindedness could say, all right, those people are really in a contact sport. And I could say, all right. And so then we get to what I just tried to suggest to you. All right, what if the few people who realize, who see the multidimensional nature of life, who see that we are indeed living in the midst of an organism that is Vetus personified, that is living in all directions, that is organic into a fourth dimension minimally, that there is nothing inorganic, and that there is nothing to criticize. There's simply the interplay of these minimal number of three forces, and that which seems to be destructive from one limited view is simply the beginning of a new structure. It is the tearing down of a liquor store to build a hospital, if you want a damn cheap example. I guess most of you would think that was progress. But if we had a few people that I point out to you had reached the point that you understood on your own, there is nothing to criticize. That is a two-dimensional hobby. That is a necessary part that ordinary people play in helping to move energy, to help convert it and then to move it through this living organism in which we all exist. Then I could, or you could say, well, these people are no longer in that same kind of friction with life. And I could say, okay, if you understand that, okay. So then you could say, well, wait, then those people are not any longer actually confronted with life in this realm that you say is necessary of it being a contact sport. It's like these people that you seem to be describing, if they existed, if it was possible, they're no longer in conflict with life. And so if they're not participating with life in the midst of it being what you said is necessary of a contact sport, then something's wrong. Well, that makes a lot of sense to me. I don't know where you followed that. That in other words, what I said had to be wrong originally. That ordinary people would be the best ally to life because they are actively involved in the contact sports with life. Whereas some of the other possibilities I seem to be hinting at would produce a person who understood that there was not a direct conflict between your own consciousness, your own understanding, your own behavior, and that which is possible as efficient conversion of energy in small pockets of life's body. But I must tell you that lateral mindedness, what I told you this week, is meaningless. It is no nourishment. To be a real ally to life, to be an actual compatriot to what life is doing, to be participating at another level with life in a contact sport situation would be where there was not mechanical conflict. It just seems to be the opposite, if you followed all of that, which I get the distinct sensation that many people did not. But perhaps we could look at one as that kind of questionable progress wherein someone can discover a whole new audience that doesn't understand what's going on. For a painter to be able to develop a whole new audience that hates his work, or who says, what the hell does that mean? But there's one good aspect to all this, I will admit to you, that people that fulfill this job in life's budding little industry throughout these years, I will point out to you that they do not work on commission. So there is always that beneficial aspect to fall back upon. How about let us stay with the yellow circuit for a minute? Again, I'm going to take something out of ordinary life, and I'm not commenting. I'm just going to take a general idea that is fairly widely accepted, and I'm going to use it. And that is, to a disturbing degree, medicine, especially Western medicine, are the ones interested in this right now, seem to find more and more that placebos seem to almost work as good as, quote, actual medication. Now, this has been building up for a long time, and many people had heart palpitations worrying about where this might lead, but there are ordinary people involved with medicine now in that part of life's body that are reaching the point that they say that the statistics are getting almost, if not unbearable, undeniable, that over a wide range, placebos in general seem to work almost as good as the, quote, actual medication they're replacing. The good old double-blind giving, splitting up groups of people with ailments and giving people who have migraines, half of them giving them placebos, giving the other half whatever the latest so-called actual medication for migraines. And they both seem to experience the same degree of recuperation from the headaches. Or they take a group who's been taking some, quote, actual medication, and they all say 70% of us are better 80% of the time. And they take that group and start shooting them sugar pills. Next week they check, it's about the same. All right. This would seem to be another example in this area that Western man especially says is of increasing interest to him, that is, what the hell is going on with the mind? And these great observations that life has allowed ordinary people to make of late, of saying, you know what? The mind can do some mighty, mighty, mighty strange things to the body. Of course, they're still operating on that erstwhile and yet childish division of this being man's brain, that being the mind, and then the body, that great old college, if not hidebound, idea of this dichotomy in which man lives. We'll turn the tape and be right back. Maybe. What I want you to try and follow me, the place from which I want to spring off tonight, is although it is unfair and unprofitable, as I've tried to show and hint to you over a long period of time, to continue to feel, to accept this natural feeling and belief that there is really a me up here. There's a distinct difference between the brain, the mind, and the body. It is so wired in that no one thinks about it. You hear the terms and you just salivate like the dogs. Yeah, I know, yeah. An idea of psychosomatic illness, which is lurking behind this same general idea that I'm saying of many people now believing that there is a strange truth somewhere behind the fact that placebos come so close to apparently having a widespread effect that almost resembles the actual medications that they're replacing, or that the dispenser suggests they are, or states they are, and then they're nothing but sugar pills. But why is it? What has life been doing, and is still doing, to wire up everyone to believe that it's not a, I'm not insinuating to you, it's just some kind of belief that a decrepit or misled educational system whipped upon you. It's not something that a mad scientist or social scientist made up somewhere. Life has used this through humanity for thousands of years. It seems to have been refined, and now instead of talking about there being gods living on mountains and possessing people, It is now a matter, even neurology believes that they're studying that the brain itself, the mind, seems to be able to come up with things that will produce chemical changes in the body. That is no longer just a general theory from the 20s, which, as I said, is much, much older. They just use different terms. They use gods and spirits in the past. But from the earlier part of this century, the belief that there was a psychological effect that your past experiences, your childhood had, that could now make you sick, that could make you prone to have ulcers, that could make you inclined to have a funny acting colon, but it could be traced back to the way your mother potty trained you. It could be traced back to the kind of pressures that your father put on you because you couldn't play football. That it was some kind of psychological something that got into your brain, into your personality, and then on an unconscious level, it worked its way down your body and has done damage. All right, apparently it's been refined. Apparently we're in a more scientific age, because what I am pointing out to you now is there are many areas in life's ordinary body now that would say, well, never mind all that. That there is something that is down to a molecular level. There is a chemical reaction going on between the brain and the body. A part of the general map that some of you do catch on to, that I have been drawing, sketching, blotting up, tearing off edges over the last year and a half, 2 years, is that, yeah, as always it was yeah, but I have tried to wean you from the past less than now efficient maps of religion, so-called psychology, to point out to you there is no difference. There is no mind and body dichotomy. There is nothing strange about a so-called theory that, wait a minute, the brain can set up kinds of neurotransmitters, can change the chemical. To point out to you there is no difference. There is no mind and body dichotomy. There is nothing strange about a so-called theory that, wait a minute, the brain can set up kinds of neurotransmitters, can change the chemical structure of the blood, and can not only apparently do damage down in the body, which is a separate thing, but apparently at times it can almost bring about miraculous changes down here by the person believing. That is, through such things as placebos, and someone's saying, take this pill, and it tells your mind that, not your body. The doctor says, take this pill, and it will cure this. It's just curing everybody who takes it. And you take it, and it's sugar pill, and sure enough, you come back, and you say, I'm cured. The only way it ceases to be a theory, the only way it's going to cease to become less than apparently strange and just new ideas, is with a few people who, in a sense, are a changing guard within life's body at its own higher levels of its nervous system, that there is no line, it's useless. It's less than profitable now for the few people to talk about the mind and the body. It is, of course, less than profitable, as I've tried to get you to see, to continue to entertain any notions that there is some kind of psychological something that's happened to me that made my brain now affect my body. You can't talk about anything psychological. You can talk about this, not just that my brain apparently now can create chemical changes that affect my body. You've got to now move back and pick up a time zone and bring it into the current now. Now, wait a minute, this thing supposedly was a psychological occurrence, a trauma, that in some way twisted my mind around and is now affecting my body. It was the same molecular activity that has gone under the name for the last many decades of being a psychological occurrence. It wasn't that. It was the same kind of molecular activity, the same kind of biochemical activities that apparently made these changes up here that's been called psychological, that then turned into some kind of biochemical change that went from here down here. It's biochemical all the way down the line. If you tried to point to somebody else and say, it's my mother that made my mind get fucked up and now gives me indigestion, and keeps my GI tract always torn up. But it wasn't, let's assume that there was some validity to this lateral line that you're attempting to draw. You've got to drop the idea that there was some kind of, quote, psychological something. Whatever it was as physical, was as molecular in structure, going from your mother to you. As you say now, your mother made your brain, your mind now do through your stomach, your GI tract. There is no difference. It's turtles all the way. But, as I was attempting to ask you, what is it that life has been up to, not only that everyone is wired up, even up until today? Notice how hard it is for just a handful of you to hear me talk about this and for you to begin to have your own sensation of the reality of this, that to call things psychological is just to say I don't understand it. That's what it amounts to today for a few people. To say it's psychological means I seem to go blank when certain things happen. But wait a minute, that must be psychological. Or to believe, all right, there's something psychological because I'm in good shape, I work out, and yet I get around certain kinds of women or certain kind of men, and I want to throw up. I get so frightened I'm afraid somebody's going to speak to me and I know I'll die. I got no idea what the hell that means, therefore it's psychological. Not only, I ask you, why has life wired up everyone to believe, as soon as they hear it, you're primed to believe it, it triggers it all, to hear this thing about, all right, if we're going to talk about your problem, sir, are we talking about, is it mental or is it physical? Why has life done that? Why has it been used? How has it been used in a profitable way? And now trying to drag you closer to a new time zone. What has life done to not only create the so-called placebo effect, but now is beginning to let a bunch of people, ordinary people, know that such a thing exists? In other words, put in two-dimensional words right quick, why has life been playing this trick on humanity, which is not true? But that makes sense at a supremely simple level. Why has life been playing this trick on humanity, comma, question mark, comma, and why is life now letting a whole bunch of people, ordinary people, realize it's been a trick? Of course, that brings on its own new problems. But now, as I said, there are a lot of so-called scientific, medical people, and much more important than that, there is now statistical evidence that to a large degree, placebos work just as well as the so-called actual medications that they're replacing. Why is life letting people see that? And I'm going to give you, not an answer, but I'm going to give you something out of the first part. Well, first note the obvious. Well, you'll note it once I point it out. The placebo effect would not work if man did not have yellow circuitry. You understand that? Surely you do. If a dog had worms of a certain kind that they had a pill to kill the worms, you've got to give a dog that pill. You cannot give a dog a placebo, a sugar pill, and say, hey, this is the most up-to-date, it is the strongest heartworm pill made. Here, take it. You do understand that that will not kill worms in a dog. Placebos will not work unless you've got yellow circuitry, or as you people like to call it, the mind. Excuse me. You've got to have yellow circuits. That is, you've got to be a human or the placebo effect won't work. Obvious, right, once I point that out. You can't do it with trees. You can't cure a cold in your pet rock by giving it a placebo pill and telling me it's an Alka-Seltzer when it's not. So now, let me stretch these ramblings a bit further. Once you see that, then could you stretch a little further and see that there are certain things that life could not do through man for itself as efficiently as it does, were it not for the apparent placebo effect. That is, or put another way, there are certain wounds, certain maladies, but I prefer wounds right now, in life's body that's going through continually, just like us, scratches, scrapes. Of course, in ordinary people's opinion and consciousness, not just cuts on your hand and turned ankles and a torn toenail, but mind wounds. In the same way, you're covered in wounds continually. Life's body, in a certain way, where humanity is in this nervous system, part of its most efficient way to heal certain wounds is possible only through man having yellow circuitry. Not many people, if anybody, seem to have caught that that was, in a sense, synonymous with the rhetorical hint that I was giving 60 seconds ago. All right, I'll try one more quick time. You could not have the placebo effect in man without a yellow circuit, without a mind that seemed to be separate from the body, without a mind that apparently a doctor or someone in authority can say, sir, here is a pill, you take this up here, I'm talking to you up here, you take this, you understand? Got it. You take it. You take one every 5 hours for 2 days. You got it? I got it. You sure you got it? I got it. You may write it down so you can read it, all right? I got it. Do that, and it will cure this down here. It's not analyzed in this way, but information, back to the great old dichotomy, information is going to the mind that's going to affect the body in some mysterious way. This so-called placebo effect, which I start out pointing out to you, that is now realized by many ordinary people, is almost efficient as medicine itself. Now, I'm taking what they say, and I'm going to tell you that's an understatement. That's what I may get at. But if we just take it that way, as strong as that is, it would not exist were it not for this apparent dichotomy. That you've got to have a mind that seems to be separate from the body for this trick to take place. You got to jump from there right quick to what I was trying to hint at you without just making an outright statement. That the placebo effect is not some sort of interesting trick that life has done. It has been an efficient way in which life heals certain wounds it has through man. It's not just for man's benefit, which of course some of you are already beginning to suspect. The idea of anything being strictly for man's benefit is somewhere on that same list with the Easter Bunny and Santa Claus and you believing that when the light hits you just right, you do in fact look a little like Robert Redford. When you get into the higher areas of the nervous system in man and in life, which is necessary for the so-called placebo effect to exist, you are finding ways in which life expedites certain healing, which is synonymous with growing processes within itself. It would not be possible. You understand that things could not take almost quantum jumps were it not for this. Assuming that such things here in 1986 we're talking about, the implantation of plastic mechanical hearts in humans. It's less than 18 months old, I guess, that the first one was done. There is no assurance that this is going much further, but that seems to be astounding. It's just something that was almost unbelievable. Your parents could not have imagined that somebody's heart is about to have a blowout, a terminal blowout, going to let them down for good. I'm talking about serious bad news, Now, a doctor somewhere will cut them open, and he's got this plastic thing that a doctor, I believe the guy wasn't even a medical doctor, was he? But at any rate, he wasn't in practice. This weird-looking plastic contraption run off of put a car battery under your arm, they stick it back in here, stick the veins and the arteries back to it, and you wake up and you're alive. And instead of this miraculous thing, a heart, you got this plastic pump in there. Your parents wouldn't have believed it. 3 or 4 years ago, ordinary people perhaps wouldn't have believed it. And there it is. But you understand it's based upon the placebo effect. There it is, and it's working. But it started out as the placebo effect. It started out as the impossible. It started out as an extraordinary idea. It started out as a form of faith healing. It started out as a form of magic, the yellow circuitry of one person. I'm just saying this as an example. That one person sat down somewhere and suddenly, I'm just saying that, suddenly seemed to begin to picture how out of plastic you could make a pump, hook it to an external source, and actually replace the human heart and perhaps the body not rejected. That is magic when it started. That was faith healing. That was the placebo effect. You have to get into the higher areas of humanity's nervous system, which is in the higher areas of life's nervous system, to have anything extraordinary, to have anything that is not simply repetition. If it was simple repetition, everybody would be dying of the same kind of heart problems that killed your forefathers. They would be dying of the same maladies, the same infections, the same viruses that killed your grandmother. And many of them, as you all should know, that were morbific, things that were deadly 30 years ago, now strikes no one in some parts of the world, strikes none of us here. It starts out as the placebo effect. It is not a trick, but it is magic. It is magic that is unique to man. It is magic that runs contrarily to repetition. But there are ways in which life operates along a repetitious line, and sometimes it'll strike out. I'm not trying to give you an absolute prediction, but I'll give you an example. Is the mechanical hearts may not go much further. It may be a passing fad. As miraculous as it seems, 2 or 3 years from now, it may be an abandoned process. There'll be explanations. Well, it didn't work out. There was talk almost as soon as they started it that, wait a minute, this may save somebody's life, but what have we done to the quality of life? The guy is hooked up to this machine. He can't do anything. He can sit around. He can watch TV. And he might have been dead if we hadn't put this in him, but it's continual. He's having respiratory problems. He's having infections. It's a miracle that we could do this. And a lot of people went, yay! And it was intriguing to hear, to read a little bit, that somebody has come up, as complex as the human heart was, somebody out of plastic has made one that they put in a guy, and he's been alive now for a year. I mean, he's sitting there in one spot and he can't move, and it's all this equipment. But you can ask him, are you alive? And he goes, yeah. Are you aware that this plastic heart kept you alive? You'd be dead if it weren't for this? And he goes, yeah, I guess. But just for instance, as miraculous as it seems, life may retreat. It may not go much further. It may be a forgotten miracle. But the miracle would have never happened were it not for what is, in a sense, you've got to learn how, by now, to see that nouns and verbs are synonymous. I can make them synonymous. Once you get past binary consciousness, there are no nouns and verbs. That the placebo effect and yellow circuitry are synonymous. Magic and the yellow circuits are synonymous. The things that seem to be, such as faith healing, which is a form of placebo. It can be attacked by those wired up to be anti-religious. It can be attacked by those wired up in life's body to be so scientific that if it cannot be duplicated in my laboratory, then fuck it. But faith healing exists. It's placebo. And I'm assuming all of you can be or stand at a triaxial crossroads long enough for me to talk to you periodically for a few seconds every now and then, is forget the ideas of gods and religion. What seems to be faith healing if somebody is saying, be healed, whatever God he calls upon, whatever religion he seems to be affiliated with, and he tells somebody, your headaches are gone, your stomach condition, your GI problems are gone, be healed. And people say, I feel better. Or my back was hurting and now I can stand up. Run across the room and praise the Lord. And a guy takes off and runs and he swears, I couldn't hardly stand to come down here tonight. I was hurting so bad. Forget about attacking that, but try for a second to forget about ideas of gods, which is all right for children and your forefathers. What we're talking about is the placebo effect, which is not imaginary. Because remember, I started this paragraph tonight by pointing out that even ordinary people, many of them now, learned, respected people, are beginning to say placebos seem to be almost as good as real medicine. It's hard to go much further at the ordinary level of that, because then which you should understand, you can't go much further with that. It's got to change directions, it's got to change dimensions, or else they would quit trying to do anything with medicine, which you can't have that. But people are catching glimpses. Life's letting people catch glimpses that, hey, something is weird, that sugar pills work almost as well as anything else. Those people don't know it. Those same men of science are talking about faith healers. They're talking about magicians. It's the same thing. But they're also talking about what they still believe is this great dichotomy that they're just beginning to piece together possible connections between the mind and the body. You're talking about one organism. You're talking about information. You're talking about energy. You're talking about heat, all coming into your organism based and limited to the same molecular laws of physics that control the internal workings of your system. You're talking about what seems to be the conversion of energy, information, heat from one organism, person, to another. And it's not in some vague never land of psychological influences, spiritual influences going from one person to another. It is the same laws of physics taking place that a man says, I pray for you in the name of the great gods in the heavens. Go forth and have an upset stomach no more. There was a conversion of energy. Instead of a sugar pill, the person apparently made sounds. But the sounds, instead of something very unsophisticated, I mean something quite beneath our day and time, that is, perhaps people out in a jungle somewhere chanting and throwing bones of animals and playing drums and going hi-ya, hi-ya, and building fires and dancing around somebody and saying, lay down and take off your clothes and I'll dance on your stomach and I'll pray to tree gods. You know, it's a good thing we're beyond that now. Because now we're up to people who have wireless microphones and rent great halls and take great tents around. They have a band play and they have potted plants behind them. And then they say they preach a sermon. They rely upon an outside source of some holy book, and they say, everyone who is sick, come up here. Thank God for progress. They don't throw down bones on the ground, and they don't chant in strange languages and play tom-toms. They sing hymns. They sing whatever kinds of music or chant, whatever is appropriate to their religion. They call upon the higher forces, and perhaps they lay hands on somebody. They take some kind of a spiritual oils or incense, and they pray to gods that seem appropriate to hear. They appeal to molecular sounds that work here. It's the same laws of physics in operation. Instead of sugar pills, instead of witch doctors and shamans and unknown tongues and fires and hot coals being thrown on your head and the bones of dead animals being cast around your body, they say, lay down on the couch and tell me the earliest thing you remember. Or they say, come here, short stuff, and be healed. And I lay hands upon you and I cast out sickness. there would be no magic, there would be no quantum changes in what seems to be the life of humanity were it not for the placebo effect, as it is called. But remember this, the placebo effect is not in some way imagination. Now, all of you that's been around this for any length of time, you must know that there are very few tenets we have here in this great religion. But one of our strong beliefs that I depend upon all of you to support is we believe sincerely there is no such thing as imagination. There certainly is such thing as imagination. But to believe imagination doesn't exist is the closest thing there is to imagination. Well, that person just imagined they were healed, right? Well, that person just imagines they're sick. What they're suffering, they're a hypochondriac. They're building up diseases in their own mind. The person was fooled. Their mind got fooled with a sugar pill, and they just thought they were well. Wait till I tell them it was a sugar pill. Then their stomach will start hurting again. I'm going to conclude by touching on something that may seem to be of more practical value, since newer people around for some length of time, all have a common corral full of certain apparent problems that they think need immediate attention. And since I did not bring the sugar pills with me, let's get into real medication, which is simply sugar pills double dosed. Everyone is wired up to have some fear. I'm talking about quite ordinary fears. Fears of flying on an airplane, fear of being up high, fear of being in crowds. All these so-called phobias and things that you may feel as though are unique to you. I continue to get questions from people that first see these tapes and look upon me as a faith healer, hoping I am some magician to give you a trick, and I'm going to get into a real trick to answer some of the questions over the last couple of years I've been receiving. And this is, of course, still good for anybody to know how long they've been around. What I'm about to say to an ordinary person would be almost useless for several reasons. One, it'd be almost useless. That's reason number one. Number two is that even if it wasn't almost useless to ordinary people, it's got to be almost useless, because if everybody heard it, it wouldn't work. That'd be like saying, wait a minute, humanity has a problem, and I can cure it if everybody will step over this way. And if everybody stepped that way, then the whole problem and everybody would have moved over there, and then I'd go, well, wait a minute, no, wait. See, because if the background moves, then the whole problem just took a step over. So it's only a few people. That's number two reason why it won't work. Number three, of course, is back to Cardinal Fang, but never mind. This is absolutely true and is absolutely effective, but it has a most limited range. I don't want to try and put any of you on the spot, but if any of you want to take a chance on this, this is almost, again, one of the litmus tests as to what kind of real interest, what kind of real potential and need you have for this. If you try this, and even if you hear it, and you immediately, you and the partnership wants to shrug it off, any fear that you have, if it appears to be a social fear, a psychological fear, if it appears to be a truly red circuit fear, such as, I love to go out and be with my friends at amusement parks, but I have never gotten on a roller coaster because I die. You may attribute that, as most people would nowadays in our society, as a what? A mind fear. It's a psychological fear. I remember my mother used to put me up on top of a ladder and say, jump off, I'll catch you, and then she wouldn't. Or the person may say, I can't stand high places and I don't know why, and I can't afford analysis. So fuck it, but something's there. It's still molecular. Forget all that, that something made you afraid of high places. Even if you did get up on a ladder and your mother or your father said, jump, I want to teach you that I'm your father and you can trust me, and you jump and he stands back and you hit the floor and he says, remember this, don't trust anybody. Even if that's true, if they did that to you and now you're afraid to get up on a roller coaster, let me tell you this. For everyone like you, there was some kid did that, and his father said, don't ever trust anybody, and the kid went, hey, good lesson. And he got right back on the ladder and jumped back off. Or it had no effect. And one of the other lessons you got to remember, forget environment. There is no environment. That was somebody else's genetics and operation. It does not matter that you consider it social, that I am very uncomfortable when I'm around somebody that I believe are my social betters. If I get around people that I can tell are economically better off than I am, I feel uncomfortable. I always drop a knife. I'll put butter on a spoon. All of these things that may seem to be covering a range from strictly physical, that you may consider your fear of heights physical. I doubt it. Most people nowadays would consider them up here, not down here somewhere, up in my mind, whether I can deal with it or not. All the way from that to that which may appear to be strictly up here, or even down in the good old blue circuits, you know, of me feeling uncomfortable around certain people. Or I'm frightened when I get around, if I get around if I get around other men who are big and strong and athletic, I feel like that I'm a poster child for the wimp of the year. I just get frightened. I almost get sick. I don't care what it is. If you're wired up with the potential to be here, and these things, and everybody's got some little piece of something. Some of you believe it's much worse than other people. Here it is. This is one. This is the best one I can give you now that you might hear. As you turn around, if you want to deal with any of this, now I'm talking about deal with it once and for all, not analysis and not being stuck with it. Let's say that you cannot stand to go on a roller coaster. That just the thought, as you would put it, just makes you sick. You'll die. Here is it. It can be simple enough for me to just tell you to go get on it. That's leaving out an important part. Here it is. You look around. Are there other people, more than one, at least, are there two other people in the world that as far as you can observe, walk right up, pay their money, get on that thing, and get up there and go, whoo, and get off and ask for another ticket? Are there at least two people in the world that do this thing and do not seem to suffer over it like you do not seem to fear about it like you do? If the answer be yes, and you do not understand that if two other people in the world can do that, you can do it, and that's the end of it. And you simply do it. But that is an important part that I'm telling you. If nobody else will do it, you're safe. Now, whatever the fear is, I'll give it some legitimacy. If you're the only person in the world, put the other way, if nobody else in the world does what you're afraid of, I'd say there's a good chance you've got a legitimate fear. Go ahead and live with it. Go ahead and enjoy it. But I'm telling you the important part. I'm not trying to be funny. And I don't want to beat here on the podium, but I'm telling you, this is almost an acid test. I hint to you most strongly. If you cannot turn around and see some other human, all right, two other people, do this thing, and you cannot understand at all, you can't get a small vibration of what I'm saying, if two other people do it, you can do it. That's the end of it. There's nothing else to be said. You may not ever enjoy it. You may do it once, and you may not ever have a desire to do it again, but you would know that you can do it. But it's on the basis of this. There is nothing strange going on in life. We're in the midst of one unified living body. People are wired up to do certain things over here. People are wired up to do certain things over here. Certain people are wired up to biochemically avoid certain things, and others are not. If you're afraid to get on a roller coaster, or afraid of heights, whatever your mind or this partnership may tell you, well, I can't stand the thought, maybe I can get up on high places, but I can't stand, I look up there and I see these people, I've seen movies, they're just going to get up high and suddenly go, boom, I'll die. I'm not questioning the feeling, and it is not psychological. It is not up here. There is nothing unique up here. There's nothing up here that is separate from down here. It is not psychological. It is not sociological. It is human. But something is seriously in question if you cannot hear what I'm telling you, that you simply look around, and at least two other people in life do this thing. They go on a roller coaster. That is the end of it. Or the serious question is how far you're going, of how much you actually hear me, how much I'm wasting my damn time. If two other people do that, that's the end of the subject. And if it bothers you enough that you have been considering this a problem, then of course I'm telling you, is go do it. And it is not a psychological breakthrough. It is not to free you from some unconscious trauma. There's several ways I could describe it. For one, you have got to see that anything, reasonably speaking, that is going on in life's body, that is, that you can do. If you were born with one leg, I wouldn't expect you, if you had a great fear of tap dancing in public. Now, let's be reasonable. If you are 4'5" and you have a great fear of basketball, don't expect just because you try this that you'll make the NBA draft next year. But anything that is, when I said reasonable, is what I meant. That you can go pay your money and go sit down on a roller coaster. You can do that. And if you see that there are two other people in the world that do it, which of course, I'm being funny, you walk out the amusement park and there are thousands doing it, and hooping and hollering and borrowing money so they can go back and do it again, and you stand there and think, I'll die. You will not die. It is not psychological. It is not something you've got to overcome. That's not even the point. You've got to begin to have some understanding that if life allows this in its body, life produced roller coasters and produced these large numbers of people that seem to love it, and it's produced at least one person I know of, me, that believes I'll die if I do it, is fuck it. If they can do it, I can do it. I mean, I enjoy it, that ain't even the point. But you've got to understand, if anybody else can do it, if life allows this to happen, not only allows it to happen, but it's produced other parts of its body that's in favor of it and seems to revel in it. That's the end of the matter. That's it. And go from that to what would seem to be more, perhaps uniquely personal problems. Of your fears of certain kinds of people, your discomfort, I cannot stand to be in certain situations. You may never enjoy the situation. That's not the point. As I said, you may never ride a roller coaster a second time. But that won't have any bearing upon your relationship between you and the roller coaster. As you could. It's now irrelevant. And again, I point to you, the roller coaster ride is not the point. If something is seriously in question, if you don't hear some of what I'm saying, I don't care how great the fear may seem to be, that if I get on an airplane and that son of a bitch gets off the ground, I don't care if it gets up a foot, I'm going to die. I'll scream, I'll bite my tongue off, I'll pull my hair out. That is a real feeling. It is not psychological. It's real. Now, I assure you it's real. But you look around. There are millions, not just two more people. There are millions of people, I guess, a week. Of course, there are hundreds and hundreds of thousands a day. Get on those big old tin boxes and they take off and they fly through the air way up high. Not a couple of feet for those afraid. I must tell you, they get up, 30 and 40,000 feet. Yeah, but I'd die. Look at all these people that get on it and they don't die. They don't go crazy. They don't scream. They don't holler. If two other people can do this in the world, I can do it or I don't deserve to live. That's just talk. Scratch that. If you don't get some sensation, some positive vibration from what I'm saying, you should seriously question how far you're going to go. And it's not to prove a point. It's not to make you unafraid of heights. It's not to get you over being afraid of flying. It's not to get you over being afraid or just uncomfortable around a certain kind of people. That's child's play in a sense. That's not even the point. But you've got to learn. And it's an immediate lesson. If you do it in one thing, you'll understand. You don't have to keep doing it, as a matter of fact. Those of you that got a real identifiable fear, such as heights or flying or roller coaster, is go through it, and the rest of these things, you'll understand if you belong in this. You cannot continue to operate with what seems to be a unique, a solitary fear of some kind. What seems to be a secret or an isolated handicap. If other people can do it and you can physically go do it, I can go pay my money and get on an airplane and sit down. If they can do it, I can do it. That's it. It's not a question of how much I enjoy it or look forward to it or whether I'll ever do it again. But you have got to learn what goes on in life's body is all within life's body. And if you belong in this, anything that you can physically do, in the full sense of the word, anything that you can do that everybody else can do that you seem to be frightened of, if they can do it, you've got to understand. You've got to be able to go do that. You've got to learn that there are not hidden recesses in life's body wherein certain people, that is mainly you, wherein you are singled out to be tortured, to be frightened, to suffer from some isolated, some solitary fear that everything within you says is tied somewhere into my past, and it's obviously psychological in nature, something that is deep-rooted. It would take analysis for God knows how many years for me to get over this. If two other people in the world do it, you can do it. And that's it. And if you don't understand that, if you can't do it, your attempted participation in this, I suggest you should seriously come into question. And I haven't singled out people and made you admit your great fear of me, told you to go do this. But anybody that's got a good distinguishable fear, you should be thankful and you should go forth almost immediately and go do what I'm telling you, but on the basis, not that, well, I'm going to choke myself and I'm going to go do it. Remember the part that I point out to you. You look around first. Do other people, just ordinary people, do they go do this thing? Yes. That's the end of it. The subject is closed. Well, I say the subject is closed. If you look around and say, all right, does anybody else do this? And the answer is yes. That means buy your ticket. That's it. Get in line. Do other people do this? Yes, there they are. Turn your little feet that way and go right there. That's it. There is nothing else to be said, done, or thought about. And if you do not have some basic suspicion of the validity of this, you perhaps should be in the ministry yourself, or within a Boston cream pie. And as we conclude, and if you'll bring the organ up, before we roll the credits, be sure and do not forget, before the evening is over, before sign-off time, do not forget our thought for the day. Those of you who aspire to be Latin critics, don't send, well, if you can really do it, send it to me. Because the thought is, how transient be sweat. All right, you people getting this by tape, those appropriate to get the task. Here's the one I want you to do for the week. I want you to go out Pick out a nice, large department store with many sales clerks, and I want you to go into a department, go up to a salesperson, and I want you to give them a short but sincere expression of appreciation over a kindness, which of course did not occur, that they showed you several months before. Such as, I want you to go up to the person and say, Miss or Sir, you probably don't remember me, but I was here, I had a complaint, whatever department you're in, clothing department, so I had a complaint about a dress, a shirt that I bought here several months ago. And the seam tore out and I came back, I don't guess you remember, but I was so mad. I don't know when I've been so mad, because I had spent what I consider to be a fair amount of money on this, and I got home and I put it on one time and it tore, and one of my friends said that they wouldn't even take it back since they would say I'd torn it and etc. Anyway, I was pretty upset, and I was pretty nasty. You probably don't remember, I guess it happens, but I certainly do remember. I was pretty nasty about this. You were so understanding, you were so nice at the time, that it made me just, I felt very badly. And I have not been able to forget it. It's been all these several months now. I want to come back and tell you how rare it is to find somebody that can appreciate and seem to be tolerant and understanding of someone being upset. It wasn't your fault, but it had a real impact on me, and I feel like almost I'm a better person for the experience. I just wanted to tell you thanks. Just make it up. Do it sincerely. Just thank them in a very similar way to what I just did. A heartfelt thanks for a kindness, a tolerance, a small encounter of understanding from them to you that didn't occur. And keep your eyes open. Just bring it to a little conclusion. If they have something to say, let them say it. If it's just smile, then just leave and say, I just wanted to do it. And keep your eyes open, not just on them, but the whole situation as you do it.